of this June 2nd, 2015 transmission. A lot of really important news up on Infowars.com. Rand Paul joins fight to release secret 9/11 documents. Bilderberg 2015, elites prepare for nuclear economic devastation. Liberals worship Caitlyn Jenner as transgender goddess. That's what's important as we see the world destabilize. Florida court rules off-the-grid living illegal. Hacked emails expose George Soros as Ukraine puppet master. Paul Craig Roberts has an article, ruled by corporations. Trendies ready for the ultimate wearable, implantable microchip under their skin. Obama, I will never engage in the politics in which I'm trying to divide people. Talk about a 1984 statement. That's some of the news on Infowars.com right now. I haven't gotten to FBI behind mysterious surveillance aircraft over cities, planes carrying video, cell phone snooping technology hidden behind fictitious government front companies. I told you about this, I don't know, more than 10 years ago. They've got not just the FBI. The EPA has them. The FDA has them. The Department of Energy has them. And they're just fleets of Cessnas. And they fly around Department of Energy, Department of the Interior. If you build a barn on your property when you're not supposed to, you know, they come and fine you. They use Predator drones on people because the cows that come on their property in North Dakota 3 times, under law, you can then take the cows. They did that, so they had Predator drones from the Air Force come in. We reported on it. They made fun of us and said that wasn't happening. Coming up at about 40 after, when Steve Pachenik leaves us, I will break that down in detail. But I'm glad that's finally hitting the news. But before we go any further, I wanted to just bring up the fact that Jade Helm is still coming up in July and August. I don't expect it to be a military takeover at that time. We said day one, it's conditioning to train our military to accept it, to train the public to accept it. And it's been in the Army Times, the Army War College has reported at Stars and Stripes, that the military's, quote, training to crush a Tea Party rebellion. And it's training for domestic insurrection. While George Soros and the Democrats and the State Department and the Justice Department have been caught trying to foment any political angst in this country against the police themselves, when there's a lot of bad police and a lot of bad training, most of it federal, it's still a scapegoat. And so they want to preemptively start unrest so Obama can be the savior this summer as economic problems and other things intensify. And as Al Sharpton said, they want to federalize the states and brand any state actions to secure security and order as racist. Dr. Steve Pachenik joins us, former head of psychological operations for the State Department, one of the guys that helped found Delta Force, did a lot of secret military operations before that. And, of course, he co-wrote a bunch of books with Tom Clancy, the late great. And he joins us now to give us his take on Jade Helm and a lot of other issues that are going on. I want to ask him about blackmail in Congress with the pervert rings that seem to permeate things and where he sees the election going. Also, he thinks of Rand Paul calling for the 28 pages to be released. StevePachenik.com. Steve, thanks for coming on with us.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, Alex. I want to thank you for what you did in bringing up Jade Helm. Actually, I was not aware of it. I live in the south near Georgia, and actually a couple of people came up to me and asked me about it. When I checked into it, I was incredulous. I couldn't believe that we would spend $10 billion on a game that has no value whatsoever, that is not even remotely related to human terrain, which means psychological warfare, understanding cultures, understanding distant cultures, understanding different topographies, and using that in Texas, New Mexico, Nevada. It actually mirrored, and I couldn't believe that General Adorno hadn't read my book, State of Emergency, where it's exactly what I wrote about when the federal government came into the state governments, actually in Nevada and Texas and Colorado, over water rights.
You know, I forgot. That's one of the last books you wrote. I hadn't even thought of that. You basically predicted that in one of your books. And then there's another book that just came out that Colonel Schaefer wrote where the same thing happens. We got to get Schaefer back on because he said, I can't tell you what's classified but I've put it in a novel, and I wonder if he was trying to warn us of something.
Well, I warned you about it in state of emergency, where I literally took an actual episode from Nye County, NYE County, Nevada, over water rights, and the federal government came in and confronted our National Guard and state troopers. And to me, this was the beginning of the Second Civil War. And I couldn't believe when I read that General Adorno, who really is not qualified to be in a military command post anymore, he was a consultant to Condoleezza Rice. He was never trained in psychological warfare. He was never trained really in counterterrorism. He's the kind of political general that we've had all along, from McChrystal to McRaven to Mullins to, a whole bunch of these generals who've done absolutely nothing. And in light of the fact that we are literally losing men, money, and time and our allies in Palmyra, Syria, where I was there during the second Iraq War, and losing men and money and allies in Iraq, where we have been spending billions, if not trillions of dollars since the Bush administration, I find this incursion into Texas, into Southwest America, absolutely incredible.
Okay, well, let me expand on this, because you are an expert in these areas. I know, ran a lot of military operations, so let me dig into this with you. As a layman, I can just read all the admissions of the Pentagon that they're being ordered to prepare for civil unrest, taking over states, you name it. And it looks like it's pointed at legitimate state actions, so it's very tyrannical. But showing Texas is hostile, showing Southern California is hostile, Utah is hostile. They admit in the early document it's to win hearts and minds, it's to simulate illegal activity, it's to study culture. Clearly, then they're talking about our culture, buying people off. So if their intent was to condition us to accept military on the streets, this is blown up in their face. But from your research, now looking at it, what does Jade Helm indeed look like? Just a total waste of money?
It looks like a total mess and a disaster and an indictment of the U.S. military, because they have been losing more and more wars since 9/11, which you know was created by Bush and Cheney. They have destroyed more countries: Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and now they're in the process of other countries, of literally losing them. They're all over Africa. What in God's name is our military and special forces doing all over Africa, fighting different insurgencies when we're not winning anything? We have no national security interest, and the Chinese are coming into every area that we're in and buying their way. They don't have any kinetic actions whatsoever. Yet our military has failed for the past 30 to 40 years. I would do what George Marshall did when he started to implement World War II. I would fire the first 600 Navy admirals and generals. We have had nothing but incompetent military senior officials.
I understand it's incompetent overall, but what do you think, looking at it, was the establishment's plan to launch this?
I don't think the establishment is that clever or that effective or that brave. Quite frankly, most of our generals are not very brave. They are men who really want to stay into the system so they can garner their pensions and then make money in the military-industrial complex. They don't have the guts to become tyrannical. You don't have that kind of man here. You don't even have it in Obama. You basically have men who are following orders, just like the Germans did. They're following orders.
Okay, well, who's giving the orders then? Because that sounds even scarier, to have incompetence poking China and Russia.
That's correct. Now you hit it on the head, Alex. That's what I wanted to inform you and your people, is that this is beyond incompetence. This is gross negligence and incompetence, but I don't mind firing them. I don't mind if they stay in their forts, Fort Bliss or Hood. I mind paying $10 billion for a totally useless exercise, which at the same time exacerbates any concerns that we have about the government, reaffirms the fact that we, the American people, do not trust our civilian leaders, our military leaders, our intelligence leaders, or our legislative leaders. In fact, what's happening with this very exercise, and why I thank you and your audience, is that it reaffirmed that under no condition do we have any trust whatsoever, whether you're Republican, Democrat.
So it's a good message to send. Don't ever try to bring in martial law.
No, you can't. I mean, when I needed the military and I needed the FBI in a hostage situation, they were incompetent. They immediately said, no, doctor, I have posse comitatus. I said, fine, don't come in, but don't bother me. And then the FBI couldn't handle repelling when they had a hostage situation in the Hanafi Muslims. So what you have...
That's right. I ought to have you on for a full hour sometime about the stuff that's declassified on some of the famous hostage situations that you've...
Well, my point is very simple. You have a make-believe military that is in fact losing men in a guacamole game where they're creating all kinds of episodes and incidents and crises all over the world, thanks to Bush, Cheney, Carter, Clinton, and Carter, the Secretary of Defense.
Stay there. I mean, it sounds like Project Loki. Sounds like Loki runs our foreign policy. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Obviously, there is a directive to militarize police, to override the Bill of Rights and Constitution. There is a totalitarian vein. A lot of these multinational corporations openly want a planetary government run by them, the opposite of a free market. They are trying to get the police to train with the military. That's a long-term project. So that's why folks are concerned about Jade Helm. But I was surprised by the huge response, and even governors and senators coming out and saying they were concerned. I think it is a no-confidence vote, regardless of the current political class, with an 8% approval rating in Gallup of Congress. So with that climate, Dr. Pachenik, and the federal government funding white privilege classes in elementary schools nationwide, and teachers are reporting that it's causing just pandemonium as everybody turns on each other. Why is the system trying to run a divide and conquer operation? What is your take on Soros funding anti-police operations? I mean, obviously there are problems with police, but there's a larger destabilization program here. What do you think the method to the madness is? Or is it a bunch of 60s radicals that are now in control, and even though they run things, they want to destroy it? Or is it just mental illness that they want to wreck the country because they're destructive? Is it deviance? What's happening?
Well, I think the best way to summarize all of this is just complete incompetency. What we've elected is a president who never had a job, had never been in the military, had never really run anything, and on the basis of his charisma was elected. That's the same thing we elected in terms of the sociopaths. Bush Jr., who totally lied, a man who was willing to use force and the intelligence system and the military in order to kill people, our own people, in the United States. The problem is we have not been willing to hold these people accountable for their miscreant behaviors. So if the American people they are not willing to stand up and say, I want Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, all the generals who were involved and all the admirals who were involved, General Myers and others, to be held accountable for our 9/11 stand-down false flag and the incompetency, as well as the CIA, we will continue to have incompetent, self-serving leaders who are intent on just serving themselves. They have nothing to do with the United States. Every general that's involved here, Adorno to Cleveland to every other military individual, including McChrystal, were all promised jobs. So you have somebody like McRaven, who was a total disaster, as Seymour Hersh said. There wasn't even a raid. He becomes the president of Texas A&M. Why? Because the Bush family takes care of everybody who colludes with them, including Gates, the head of the CIA, who was a very ineffectual CIA director and a very ineffectual Secretary of Defense. So until the American public at the local level refuses to have our military stand ground in an area where it involves posse comitatus, you have commissioners at the local level in Texas, Nevada, Utah, and in Florida where we can say, no, you cannot come in here, it's posse comitatus. No, we have police forces that enact judicial actions. The military.
Sure, there are preparations for massive civil unrest at an unprecedented level. What do you think those are about?
Well, I don't think they're very effective. Number one, we're a very large country. Number two, I've seen our military repeatedly defeated. Alex, this is something your audience has to understand. We have been defeated with trillions of dollars in Iraq. This is the 12th year that we now, Secretary of Defense...
But that's the larger globalist plan to destabilize the world while sapping our resources.
Well, I don't think there's a destabilization plan. Again, let me go back to it where you and I differ. I think our incompetence is so grand and so fungible that we have been funding people who should have been eliminated and